Screenless.
The TV drama is imagined. The work and the guests are real. Making a soundtrack. Hello, and welcome to the Making a Soundtrack podcast.
Opening scene and action!
I'm Gareth Davies.
And I'm Dan Watts.
So, Dan, how are you doing? How's your week been?
Good, thank you. Yep, busy as per usual. Lots and lots of stuff going on, but all good. How about you?
Yeah, similar. Lots of podcast editing. I'm listening back a lot, actually, and I think it will help inform our next steps. So this morning, actually, I listened back to all the episodes that we've done already, and there are little nuggets of wisdom in there, things that we've said that I might have forgotten, and things that our guests have said, which I think I've since thought, yeah, of course, yeah.
I should probably do the same. It's one of those things, I mean, you know, does anyone really like the sound of their own voice? I'm sure there are some narcissists out there that really do like the sound of their own voice. I don't. So, once it's done, it's kind of done.
Well, it was part looking for information. It's also part production for me. So listening back and thinking, are the mixes okay?
Yeah.
How does it sound? What can I do better? That kind of thing. I've also, a little while ago, I went to an airfield down south and recorded a Boeing Stearman biplane engine.
Ooh.
It was just there, right in front of me. And so I put the microphone down surreptitiously and started recording. And at that moment, the engine started and it just sat there for about 10 minutes. I just could not believe my luck. So I've captured all this,
amazing
this plane engine. So I've thrown that in the shared folder for us to use for whatever.
Ooh.
Shall we have a little listen?
How can we sneak that in? Yeah, let's have a listen. Sounds awesome.
I'm sure it'll probably end up as a drone or some kind of atmosphere.
I don't know how you could do something with because the startup of the engine's just awesome. It really is. I'm going to say that word again, awesome.
There's a point at the end as well where it starts to taxi. So it'll kind of drift off into the distance, which is equally as awesome. Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
Anyway, on this episode, we have scriptwriter for TV and film, Andrea Gibb. She's coming up in a little bit, who delivers what can only be described as a masterclass in navigating the world of TV production. I couldn't believe my ears when we were talking to her. She had lots of good advice and was very open, wasn't she?
Yeah, very open about the whole thing. Said that all of the information that she was giving was freely available already.
But there's something.
But we were both sat there and I both said, are you taking notes? I know we're recording it, but at the same time, are you taking notes? Because it was just fascinating.
And although she said very clearly that the advice that she was giving is freely available in books, there's something about someone with that level of experience giving that advice or repeating that advice that's wholly more believable for me. Well, shall we catch up with what we're doing with our music? And cue the music.
Let's do it. Cue the music.
Cue the music.
So, we have been collecting sounds.
We have been collecting sounds. I'd started looking at some appliances. So if we go into drones to begin with, we've set up a folder there, haven't we?
We have, yeah. So this is on our Google Drive that we've both got access to.
Yes, indeed. So we're looking at the same thing, despite being 100 miles apart. So I played around with some natural sounds of a local lock that we have here at Shepperton. So it was the lock water filling the lock. So I made that into a drone, stretched out the sound, and also of a fan oven. So let's have a listen to those. Okay, what do we think of those then?
I really like both of them. I think the lock water's just fascinating. You can tell it's water, but at the same time,
I try to include a little bit of the dry signal. Most of it is wet signal, so that means the effect rather than the raw signal that I recorded. Is that an immediate put in the use folder for the lock water?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I can see us using that.
Okay. So, Dan, what have you been messing around with?
Well, I decided, I too was thinking, oh, well, I'll just grab a field recorder and go out and record whatever I can find, wherever, and was a bit pushed for time. So instead, went round the house recording things, all sorts of stuff. We've got a ship's clock on the wall in the kitchen, so I recorded a bit of that. Although I don't think we used any of that in the end. There was some hum from one of the fridges. We've got a microwave that I recorded. I just put it on for 30 seconds and recorded it with beeps and everything. And bizarrely, because, well, my house is a bit weird anyway, but it's an ex-care home, so it's got a lift in it. So I went in the lift and just recorded myself going down from the top floor to the ground floor and made a loop out of that.
That's amazing. You've got a lift in your house?
Yes, there's a lift and two sets of stairs. It's a ridiculous situation, and there is a reason behind it, but we won't go into that now.
I imagine that the microwave might be a very good fit for a drone.
Yes, well, I instantly found that if you time stretched it so it was really long, there was all sorts of interesting textures in it. And whilst it was recording, I found a couple of sweet spots by moving the microphones backwards and forwards. And it's almost a little bit like the lightsaber sound from Star Wars, you know, that kind of thing. But it's nowhere near as cool as that. It's kind of a lame lightsaber sound.
Shall we have a little listen to it?
Yeah, let's have a listen to that.
Great. To me, that's an immediate use as well. Put it in the use folder.
Great.
And these drones, we can do different things with them, can't we? We could either make a contact instrument, which contact being the sampler, that we could both use, which means that we can alter the tone of it.
Yep.
And then maybe build on that, you know, use it as the kind of foundation of kind of an atmosphere or an ambience.
I think it's, especially if it's taken from a real world thing, it gives it another quality, something that's not 100% synthetic, even though you've obviously put it inside a computer and messed about with it. It gives things a place. And it gives it a feel, and instantly feels real rather than synthesized. Not that there's anything wrong with synthesizers. Anyone who knows me knows I absolutely adore synthesizers, but I think in this context, having that real world kind of vibe is what's going to work for us.
Yes, this is what we're going for, really, isn't it? There is a place for sample libraries and things, but we're really trying to make this sound as unique as possible. So you recorded lots of different things in your house.
I did.
Including your lift. And can we listen to your lift?
Yeah, that's I've got a little loop.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I've not really done anything with it apart from boosted the signal. There's a little bit of EQ and just boosted the signal, really. It's just the runners. So it's obviously there's big wheels to guide the thing down, and I think it's just those. But there seemed to be a natural rhythm to it.
Absolutely, and if you record something that's quite short and do that on a cycle, then it's going to create that kind of an unnatural but very accurate rhythm, depending on what your BPM is in your session.
I think I worked it out as 110.5 BPM.
That's very precise and very helpful. Yes. Very helpful. You also did a very low piano hit.
I did. Now, the piano I have is not in the studio. It's in a separate room, and I do record it, and I have to take stuff down there to record it. But I just thought if I did the highest notes and the lowest notes, it would be interesting to see what we could get out of it. And I actually managed to do, just by rolling off a lot of the top end and putting a bit of reverb on it, I managed to turn it into a, a kind of hit. So let's just listen to that. The other thing I did with the exact same note was I auto-tuned it. I knew it was going to be slightly out of tune, so I thought by sticking it in something to actually put it up to concert pitch would be interesting. And I've just called it Wonky Piano, which I might turn into a contact instrument. So it would be like an actual piano, but this wonky note. So that sounds a bit like this.
That's fantastic. Okay, so there's a fair bit to work from there. Now, you also recorded lots of rhythmic things in your house.
Yeah.
And I've had a little go, since you've uploaded those, I've had a little go at recording a rhythm. So gathering those all together. And I'm not saying that this has to be used. I've just been experimenting. I think it highlights a way that we could use things in different formats, in different tempos, in different combinations. So let's have a little listen to that.
Yeah, love that.
Great. It's a good example. I wanted to include I think you did a squeaky door or something.
With it being an ex-care home, there were lots of door closers and all this kind of stuff that they had to have on these things so that all the doors shut themselves. And a lot of them we've taken off now, but there's a few still there. And the really squeaky one is actually in the bit next to the studio, which I've got at the top of the house. And it's just a store cupboard, so it's where my sort of mics and bits and bobs that I don't use but it's got a really great squeaky noise. So quite a lot of that is actually that door, because it's a heavy fire door shutting, and then the squeak from the thing.
I included that in the rhythm just to give it a kind of a breathing quality. Everything else is fairly on the beat and everything, but that kind of just comes in and creaks every so often.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Excellent. So let's move on to textures. I think we've both done a couple of things here.
Yes, you did something interesting with sticks.
Yes, I went to a place called Horsell Common, which listeners might know as the landing place for the aliens in War of the Worlds.
Did you take your theremin?
I did not, although...
shame.
I mean, I looked enough of a lunatic as it was, dragging branches around and sticks and stomping around in circles and things like that, without a theremin as well. So I was picking up branches and dragging them around and recording those. I brought that back. I put it into Space Designer in Logic and had a mess around with that. And this is what happened.
Oh, it's eerie.
It sets a scene, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Along with the lock water, it's hard to tell if that's branches or water, or that could be water against a boat. I don't know.
Yeah, it does.
But it's quite nice that it conjures the image without it being very obvious what it is.
Yeah, it's real. It's derived from something real. It's slightly unsettling, but yeah, it does have an almost, I don't know, it's because it's a reverb that's been used to manipulate it, but it does have a sort of watery quality to it.
Yeah. Okay. And you've been recording your kettle?
Yes. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm basically fueled by tea. I am a proper northerner. Everything can be sorted with a cup of tea, and I thought I'll just record my kettle. All I did with it was I used a plugin that's, again, it's used for vocal treatments really more than anything else. And I used the auto-tune feature in that to lower it by 1 and 2 octaves.
Great.
Which made it interesting, I thought.
Great. Okay. Let's have a quick listen to each of those. They sound very, very good. And again, like you said, you get the sense of something real, but you're not quite sure what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's really exactly what we're going for, isn't it?
When you take something real worldy and do something different with it, it's like, what is that? I mean, it's a cool sound, but you know, unless you happen to be the person who recorded it, you know, you couldn't tell that was a kettle.
Yeah. So what happens next, do we think?
I've already got a little bit of a idea for a melody just after listening to the lock. So I think maybe the next thing is for me just to have a play with that.
Okay.
And see what comes out of that.
Great. Okay. I might just go back through and I might just get drawn to something and have a further play. I might come up with some more drones and more, you know, just add to the kind of toolkit, so to speak. And then maybe if you need me to play anything for your melody, very happy to do that. Or just, you know, just let me know. Well, I think that's it for this week. So by the time we get to the next episode, I think we should have some more, well, certainly some sketches.
Yeah, something to play, something to listen through, I think. Some ideas, I hope.
And we can start building that jigsaw.
Yeah.
Andrea Gibb is a film and television writer. Her feature film Dear Frankie, starring Emily Mortimer and Gerard Butler, won the Women in Film and Television Script Award in 2004. And since then, she's been BAFTA nominated, worked on countless productions, including Nurse Pauline, Queen of Cooks, Call the Midwife, and the recent Festival Award-winning film adaptation of Swallows and Amazons. Her feature-length adaptation of Emma Healy's award-winning novel Elizabeth is Missing went into production for STV and BBC One in the summer of 2019. Andrea Gibb, welcome to the Making a Soundtrack podcast.
Thank you very much. That was a lovely introduction.
When did you first realise you wanted to be a writer, and what continues to inspire you to write?
I was an actor for a good 10, 12 years before I even considered becoming a writer. In all honesty, it never occurred to me that I could even do it. I used to I'd be given a script and that I was in, and I used to think that writers were magicians. And in some ways, I still think that, except I have a lot of self-doubts about my own work, but I always find the work of other writers astonishing. I can't quite ever believe how they do it. So it was a kind of, for me, I was coming up, I was in my 30s and late 30s, and I was thinking, gosh, I need to think about something else, not just being an actor, because, you know, parts for women in their 40s, they're few and far between, really good roles and things like that. And I was doing well. I was what we would call a jobbing actor. I was on television, I was doing theatre, but, you know, there were periods of downtime, of unemployment, and I was thinking, gosh, I need to think about something else. You know, what else is there? And I went up to Scotland. I was living in London at the time, to do a show at a theatre called the Tron Theatre in Glasgow, which is a fantastic theatre. And it does a lot of really amazing work. And I was really, really proud to be there, working there. And I was working with an actor called Peter Mullen, who I think most of you will know who he is.
Yeah.
And at that time in Scotland, what really struck me was that people were being encouraged, artists, creative artists, were being encouraged to do more than just one thing. You didn't have to be in a box. You didn't just have to be an actor. You didn't just have to be a painter, or, you know, I was going to say a painter and a decorator, but you know what I mean. You could be more than one thing. You were sort of encouraged to expand what you felt was your creative horizon. And someone like Peter was quite an inspiration for that, because he was writing, he was directing, he was this amazing actor. And I sort of thought, maybe that's something, maybe I could do something else creatively. So I went back to London, and I thought, well, maybe I could write a short film, you know, my naivety thinking that was so easy. And And the one thing I did know about was I knew what script looked like because I'd been an actor for so long, but I didn't really have any real notion of how to structure or how to do a story arc or anything like that. What I had was a series of instinctive impulses, and I knew what a bad line of dialogue was because I'd said quite a few in my illustrious acting career. I understood subtext instinctively because of being an actor, because that's what you work from. That's what you hide when you're an actor, if you like. And I also understood that conflict was the essence of drama. So those things were natural, instinctive things I understood. I had no clue about how to do anything technically. Anyway, I come from a working class family from Greenock, west coast of Scotland, and my mother had 7 sisters. My father was a Protestant. My mother was a Catholic. I have a foot in both camps. And I have a million dysfunctional family stories, basically, although I love my family very much. And I know that writers were one of the things you're told when you're an emerging writer. I always think of that as like coming out of an egg, but you know what I mean. So my first attempt at writing was a short film, a story my mother had told me about her sisters and her auntie. So I wrote it based on that. Basically, I wrote a little short film called Lucky Bag, and I was lucky enough to know a producer who was prepared to read it, and she was incredibly encouraging and said, "I think this is good. Write something else." So that was really the start of it, and it was living in my head. And I loved that. And I could be all the parts. I wasn't just the social worker or the teacher or anything like that. I could be everything. And I'd say all the voices aloud. And I really had a good time. And I think that was a bit of a revelation. Although it did take me a good many years before I would read a book on how to write, because I was frightened that instinctive thing would go if somebody taught me the rules. So I didn't do that for a while. And also I just sort of, I had a kind of good time, and that was kind of and and weirdly enough, as an actor, I used to be quite sort of, oh, am I any good? I was tortured with self-doubt, but there was something liberating in this writing thing, mainly because I think I was doing it for myself to begin with, and anybody that was very kind enough to read it for me, that I didn't feel those doubts. It was a very strange thing, and people who know me very well will say that to me now and say the difference between my confidence as an actor and my lack of self-immolation, if you like, or doubt as a writer is quite striking, and I have no idea why that is, because that's not to say that all my writing is good or even passable. It's just my attitude to it is different.
Yeah. So that's how you got started. How about what continues to inspire you?
I think what it is because I'm not going to lie, writing can be a slog. It can be a real slog, and sometimes you're just banging your head off a wall and you can't find it. And quite often you've taken on jobs that really you shouldn't have taken on because you're not your voice isn't suiting it, if you like, but you persevere. A lot of writing is about perseverance and being prepared to keep on rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. So there is a slog attached, and I'm not one for saying that writing is a spiritual pursuit, because I don't believe that. It is hard work, although you're not down a mine, I just have to say. It's not that. But it is really, really, really hard, and you do have to kind of constantly be changing and being open to change and all of that thing. But I think what keeps you going is your ability to reach out to people if you're lucky enough to get things made, or that is to reach out to a lot of people and to have something to say. Because I feel that writing, if you are taking on, it's quite a responsibility, particularly if you adapt other people's books. You have an enormous responsibility to the source material, and I think you have an enormous responsibility to the ideas at the heart of that material. So I think I'm inspired by ideas that I feel have something to say about who we are as people, as humans, as a community, as all of those things about the state of our community, our society. and about also our humanity. And so a lot of the things that I am inspired by is work like that. And I hope, I aspire to, I wish that's what I want to do, is write work that has meaning. And I don't mean that in a really pompous way. I just mean has meaning. Because there is meaning in small details, in the smallest aspects of human life. And those are the kind of things that inspire me. And that's why I keep on doing it. Plus, I get paid.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you.
I find it fascinating because we've spoken to several other creatives that not necessarily musical. Rob McCallum, who's a concept and storyboard artist, and he brought up a lot of the same themes that you have about not really knowing whether you're any good, all of the sort of self-doubt that you have around all these things, and the slog and the process, and how you have to just keep working and keep working. And there are so many parallels with that and what we do, writing music. It's not that you can boil it down to the same thing all the time. There are obviously differences between each discipline, but there's definitely some common ground on the whole thing about creating something out of nothing.
I think that's true. I think there is this myth sometimes that is thrown up about creativity, that it is something that happens almost without you trying, that it's just in you, and you just sit down at the computer and you just go, oh, I'm pouring my soul onto the screen. And it's really not like that. I mean, in my Elizabeth is Missing folder, I have a folder on my desktop. My desktop is a nightmare, but I can occasionally find a folder. And it has, I think there must be, oh my goodness, 120 different drafts.
Wow.
Not all will have been read. Not all will have been shown to anyone else. But I will certainly have created that amount of work in producing the script that was eventually shot. And that work started in 2014 and was finally shot in 2019. And that is par for the course for a scriptwriter in this country. And I mean, that's the average length of time it takes to get from the start to the finish. And that means that I'm not saying that that projects don't happen faster than that, but I think by and large, when you embark on something, to write something that you hope will get made, because it doesn't always, you are looking at committing a good 4 years of your life to that single idea, to that single entity. And so therefore you have to be absolutely sure that you are saying something you want to say within it. Otherwise, what is the point?
The other thing that you raised earlier that I thought was interesting was about your voice not fitting maybe with some of the jobs that you took on. And I think that's another thing when you are creating music for any kind of media, is that you have to create something. Somebody else is the boss. You're creative, so there's things that you want to say, there's things that you want to do, but somebody else is the boss, and they can disagree with you, and they can push you down another way because that's the way that they want it to be, not the way that you do. And I think a lot of this job is working out what other people want from you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because one of the things we always feel, I usually start off working with a producer who will have come to me and said, this is something we're looking at in our company or whatever. Are you interested in this book? Are you interested in this piece? Is it something you would like to do? And what's your take on it? That's usually how my things start. And it's not only just the material that I think is important then, it's, are you on the same page? Which is exactly what you were saying. It is your vision. That word sounds so elevated, and it sounds a bit pompous sometimes, but are you both wanting to make the same thing? Because if you're not, you are going to run into so many difficulties further down the line, because you're going to feel as a writer that you're being stamped on, and the producer is going to feel that they've taken on the wrong person for the job. So quite a lot of that, you've got to use your instincts when you first go to meet someone who wants to work with you. Is this going to be a productive, creative partnership? More often than not, it is. I've been very lucky with the people that I've worked for. But I think you just have to be aware of that, because otherwise it's going to be so frustrating. Although that's not to say that things won't change midstream, because when you bring a director on, that's another voice in the mix. So you have to be sure that that one is also, and to use a musical analogy, is in tune, because otherwise, there's going to be so much discord. There you go.
Yeah.
And I'm finding it now.
Where's my bingo card?
As you said, you're investing 4 or 5 years of your life on something to get it made, and you need to be able to work with these people. And when we are working, because we're at the end of it, so you've put in a very, very long stretch, and quite often we're hired at the end and we get months, maybe just weeks to do our thing. And it can mean very, very long hours, 16, 18. I think the most I did was 22, which, just to hit deadlines, which is just crazy. But when you are doing that, it's very important that you are working with people that you get on with, that you trust, and that you're on the same page with. Otherwise, it just all falls apart very quickly.
I think that's true. One of the things I do quite a bit of mentoring, to not necessarily young writers, but to writers who are starting out, because there's quite a lot of people find writing in their middle years or slightly later, and that's great. I mean, why not? You're never, ever, ever too old to start or to begin or to do anything. I say go for it. But I that's one of the things I think I always stress, is that if you find someone that you have simpatico with, you grab onto them and you make that a creative partnership in the journey, because that is going to stand you in great stead. And it's when you look at, great filmmakers, and this includes the composers they work with, or the cinematographers they work with, or whatever, they find their tribe, in inverted commas.
Yeah.
And they hold on to their tribe, because that is where the most productive, creative work will happen, is with people that you just get. And it's not easy to find these people. I know that. I'm not saying you just go out and you shop for them, because obviously it's not. And it can be, working with people that you don't have that common ground with, it can be really, really hard, and upsetting. But if you find them, cling on.
Absolutely. So you've done both TV and film. What I mean, are there differences, or is it just the work? Is it different writing for the small screen versus the big screen, or is it just the work is the work?
I think there are definitely differences. When I first started writing, I was very lucky because I was Scottish. I could apply for all these film schemes that were run in Scotland by a body then called Scottish Screen. They're different now. It's different now. And so I came up through those schemes. Most of my short films were commissioned by the Scottish Screen and were made with Scottish Screen and Scottish broadcast money. And at that time, I would never have contemplated television, really. It was film that was the thing that was accessible to me as a person starting out. I'm not sure that's entirely the case anymore. I think people starting out now, finding schemes and things like that to help you get going in film, slightly less available, although BFI do short film schemes to help people. But it is that's a way into the film industry. For me, the path in initially was through film. So that's what I started writing. The short films and my 2 feature films got made quite quickly. So I felt myself to be a film writer. But film, particularly in Scotland, the industry, it didn't really manage to sustain itself. It's very difficult to get films financed. It's a slog, I think. And that, I think, is why you find more even high profile directors are now moving to television, because things like Netflix and all those other platforms have come along and have revolutionized television in a way. So there's more opportunities for people to get their work seen. Now, whether that it's easier to break in, I don't know, but it's certainly, there is more opportunity opening places in television. That's not to say that it's still easy to get any TV made, because it certainly isn't. And you can go in to be commissioned to write a TV script and spend 2, 3, 4 years of your life on it and it not to get made. And that's very, very, very common. I've got quite a few of those projects that I've worked on and put heart and soul into, but they, for some reason, by the time they're ready, there's no slots, or the broadcasters have changed their minds, or they're no longer fashionable, or they're not very good, or whatever the reasons are, they don't get made. So, but I think there is also a difference in film. The writer is considered, I don't really quite know how to describe this, but it's considered to be a director's medium, because somebody once wrote an article in a French film journal and created this notion of the auteur theory. Now, I'm going to put my cards on the table. I don't hold with that. I don't hold with a film by title, because I happen to believe that film is collaboration. I think that directors and writers and cinematographers and editors, who also are the third person to make up the story, by the way, composers, makeup artists, every single member of the crew has a hand in creating that film. And that's not to say that the director isn't the conductor, if you want to say, the orchestra, but it's certainly he. And you see, there you go. I said he, because most film directors, shockingly, are men. They are not the creators of the film, if you like, because that is something that happens in the process of the collaboration. Cards on the table, I do not hold with a film by. In television, it's slightly different in the sense that the director is usually brought on later in the process. So the writer will have worked with the producer and the development executives and the commissioners to get a script to the point where it is ready to be seen by a director, and they will then bring a director on to direct it. Now, I think that is shifting and changing too, but certainly that is my experience at the moment. So in terms of authorship, creative authorship, if you like, the tone and the vision for that TV idea has kind of been set. So what you're looking for is a director who's going to come along and carry that through, as opposed to a director who's going to come along and throw all letters up in the air and rearrange them when they fall down on the table. And obviously with TV, you're on a small screen. With film, you're on a big screen. So in terms of your epic choices or your landscape, that's different too. You know, which is why I think a lot of television is more domestic and is smaller in focus, but not necessarily in universal theme. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's kind of how I distinguish it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Having done both, working on a children's thing that was, I don't want to use the term sausage factory because it wasn't like that, but they had a way of doing it, and it was done really quickly, and everyone was formulaic. It was formulaic to a degree, but it was done in they had the team. It was very clever. They had the team. So you had pre-production, then production, then post-production. And you had the same teams on each, and they'd do like 10 episodes. So they'd split it into 2 and have the first 2 go through. And then when the first 2 had gone through pre-production into production, episode 3 and 4 would come in behind, and they would slot in and just work their way through. That meant that the whole team was being used and utilised constantly. Whereas the directors then were brought in, and they literally had 2 weeks. 2 weeks, they'd do their thing, and if they were only doing the 2 episodes, that was it, they'd be gone. And then another director would come in, and they'd do that, and then they'd go. But with film, obviously the director, as you say, is there from the start, and to a degree, they take it on as their baby, whether they've written it or not sometimes. But the ones that I've worked with have all been writer directors. So that's a different thing in and on itself.
Yeah, completely different.
Yeah.
I think that whole notion of the factory television, if you like, is interesting.
Yeah.
Because I work on Call the Midwife, and I am struck by how amazingly clever that team on Call the Midwife know their show inside out. So I wouldn't remotely describe it as a factory, because what it is they understand their audience, they understand their demographic, they understand what their show is and what it is for and who it is for, And that is why they make such a successful job of it, because they've come along, they've understood their parameters, they know exactly what it is what they want to say and to whom they want to say it to. And it is just incredibly successful for that reason. They never, ever, ever lose sight of their audience. With films, sometimes you need to know who your audience is, whatever you're writing, because otherwise, what is the point of writing it if you don't know who you're writing it for?
Yeah.
So you're not writing it for yourself in some self-indulgent exercise, even though it's enjoyable. As I've already said, I love doing that. But the point is, if I don't know who my story is for, what is the point of me writing it? Then I wouldn't know how to shape it. I wouldn't know how to what the tone should be or anything like that. So that's a key for me in writing anything, film or television. And I think in the really successful TV, like Succession, or which I am absolutely hooked on at the moment, that knows exactly what it is. It knows its tone perfectly. It is genius writing. The thick of it, there are Fleabag. There are numerous examples of what you might deem factory, the Killing Eve, in the sense that they're rolling on a program. They've got one going, they've got two in production, two in prep, and two being written. That so they've got a process. But in terms of what they're doing it for and who they're doing it for, they are spot on. They know exactly. I think with film, even though you think you know who your audience is, or you hope you know what it's for, sometimes they don't come. No matter what Kevin says in Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. Sometimes they absolutely don't come. Not through any fault of the film necessarily, but just because people don't, the effort of getting to the cinema or, whatever, publicity, the distribution chain, all of those things suddenly come into factor. And also, I guess also with the thing is with television and the difference in film and TV is that with film, you're sort of stuck in a darkened room for 90 minutes. If you've made the contract with the filmmakers to go and sit and watch their film, it's more difficult to get out because you're kind of there. Whereas with TV, you've got to know your audience in that first 15 minutes.
So bringing it back to what Dan and I are doing, we're really creating a TV drama soundtrack without any context of a TV drama, which sounds a little bit bonkers, really. But so we've kind of tried to imagine how a track listing for an album would go, having listened to soundtrack albums. And I was wondering if we could share with you what we've decided. Maybe you could tell us if we are way off the mark or we're on the right track. So we've got Scribble here, which we went through, but it's going to be up on our social media as well for people to have a little look at. We started with an intro. So obviously these titles aren't final. So an introduction, so that bit before the opening titles where it really sets a scene. Yeah. And then moving from that into the theme tune, which we're not even going to approach until nearer the end, when we will have a much better idea of what we're dealing with. Then for track 3, we've moved on to location. So we've gone through the introduction, theme tune, and then we are writing about a location. Where is this thing set? And then moving into a couple of character themes. So character 1, character 2. Again, we haven't drilled down any details about who these characters might be or their natures or anything like that. And then we come to an event. So something happens. So I suppose we're getting into the second act, what you might call that.
After the first act, turning point.
Turning point. Oh, right. Yeah, where's my pen?
It's got a lot of people who tell you how to structure screenplays, give it loads of different names, but it's basically the same thing. In terms of story structure, sorry to interrupt, but just to give you story structure to where you are now. Its story is interesting because if it's a single protagonist story, the setup, if you like, the introduction, that first act, would be about setting up the character where they are now, in terms of who they are now, how they behave, what their problem is. So you tell the audience, this character has these problems, is in this difficulty. This character is stuck in a stasis. This character is in trouble because, or whatever. This character thinks everything is all right. This character is in for a shock. Set the character in the place, which is is your location thing. So we know where the character exists in terms of its the character's physical space. And we also know where the character exists in terms of the mental space. So the physical place and the mental place, if you like, can either be in opposition or can be complementary. So that's the kind of thing that you're dealing with in a setup.
Okay, that's interesting.
And then you get to what Robert McKee in story would call the inciting incident, which is...
Hang on, I need to get a pen.
I am writing this down.
This is like a masterclass.
And that inciting incident, if you think about Wizard of Oz, that inciting incident is the tornado when she is cast off into, away from Kansas, because Dorothy at the beginning of Wizard of Oz is just saying constantly, Kansas is presented as somewhere Dorothy wants to get away from at the beginning of the story. The tornado happens and she's granted her wish, basically. She is catapulted out of Kansas towards Oz. So that is kind of one way of looking at a story, because then your protagonist is thrust into this new situation, this new place, this new location where anything can happen. The writer can decide what obstacles, what is that character going to have to overcome in order to come home from the tornado. I once went on a course after I felt confident enough to do some work on story structure, because structure is my least good aspect, if you like. I'm not great at it. And this guy just did it very simply. And he just said, character 1, who is your main protagonist, starts at point A. Something happens, the inciting incident, the tornado, whatever you want to call it. And they get catapulted into this place, which is called the liminal zone. And in the liminal zone, which is basically Act 2, anything can happen to this character. Anything. So in terms of your soundscape, you could go anywhere in Act 2. As long as you keep the main themes going, because you will have introduced the main theme. Like a concerto, I suppose, or a symphony. You bring in the main themes and then you disrupt them. But you then come out of the liminal zone after your character has gone through a series of transformations or changes or whatever, although in real life we know people don't really change. But this is story. This is reality. This is not reality. This is story, and people want to be, inverted commas, transported. They come out at the end of the liminal zone, having gone through all this transformation, allegedly changed to point B, which is their resolution, which is where they are now in a place where maybe their physical and their emotional are more in tune.
Yeah.
And that's the resolution. That's basically Act 3.
Wow.
Yeah, okay.
If you're doing a franchise, you're going to leave your resolution open because you need more money.
Yeah. Cliffhanger. So really, it sounds like, because we had character theme 1 and character theme 2, or rather character 2 theme, we could probably do away with a character, couldn't we?
Yeah, I think story is all character, really, basically. I think event, personally, this is me.
Yeah.
I think event, story, plot springs from characters' behavior. So I always find the reliance on story. You need story. You can't have story if you don't have character generating story, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I think the character is everything. You can have internal conflict, inner conflict, which people have, but then you will need somebody else to externalize that internal conflict for an audience. Otherwise, how do they know? It's not a book.
And actually, if we are leading a character into some kind of event and we have some kind of theme for the two different characters, then that conflict can be represented by those two different themes.
Completely. That's where you get I think that happens a lot in music, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You feel two themes going in opposition to one another, even though probably the themes will have similarities in terms of the choice of key or whatever. There will still be opposition in terms of, I mean, I'm thinking, I don't know, Stravinsky. Isn't it? I don't know, you know,
There's plenty of dissonance in Stravinsky.
and conflict and all that kind of turmoil that music brings so brilliantly. I mean, I think it's interesting the use of music in film and TV, because quite often I find the music, it can sometimes get in my way because I want to feel it myself, and I don't like to be told often what to feel. If you're in the cutting room or the edit and you think, oh God, it's not quite working for whatever reason, let's whang on a bit of sentimental music because we've not managed to pull it off. Quite often my most favourite soundtracks have been the ones that have been sparse, but absolutely on the money for the emotion that needs to be created in that particular moment. I think composing a soundtrack is an astonishingly masterful thing when done correctly. And, you know, when done, it can be a very, very beautiful thing. You know, if you think about the great soundtrack composers, you know, you think of the way they use music in film, it's fantastic. But sometimes we use too much of it and you're like, I know I'm meant to feel that.
Absolutely. There's been a couple of occasions where I've been told that there's a gag happening, so we need something funny. And it's like, well, no, you don't, because it is funny. Why do we need music underneath it? You don't need me to do wah, 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 wah. You know, it's funny as it is. We don't need music. There was a period where there was a lot of TV shows that were wall-to-wall music, and it was just too much. It's relentless. It's just, you know, just constantly there, banging away. But that seems to have passed now. We've definitely got to a point where there seems to be an equilibrium again.
Oh, that's because I think it's, you know, I think you do need that. I think because quite a lot of times you feel like the audience are being underestimated, and you really should never, ever, ever underestimate your audience. Because when I did Swallows and Amazons, for, you know, that's a family film, and we were hoping to appeal to a cross-generational demographic. That was the whole point of it. You know, it was for the people, the older people who had loved the book when they were children, but it was also for contemporary children. It's something that grannies and granddads and mums and dads could take the kids to. And what I think is absolutely true about that is that you need nostalgia in there because you are appealing to people, you know, in a nostalgic way. But you also need music that is also going to excite and generate and, you know, and keep the story moving, if you like. So it's that balance, isn't it? It's that balance of finding the themes and the tones and I think the type of music that you use on particular films is everything. Because jarring music and you go, ooh, that doesn't fit, or why did they decide to do that?
And as Dan mentioned, you know, you don't necessarily need to put music into certain situations. And as you mentioned, Andrea, sometimes people are afraid of silence. The use of silence in some scenes can have such a powerful effect, where sometimes editors will go for some underscore or something to not have the silence. And I think there's a lot of power to be had there.
I think that's a very good point. And I often find as well, when critics are reviewing film or telly and they're praising people for their contributions, quite often, most of the time, screenwriters write silence. They write it. It's in the scripts. And things like that are, you know, we put it in our scripts. You know, it's our thing. Pause, silence, noise. It's in the script. And I think that often critics don't realise, or I'm not just blaming critics, but silence is, as you say, an astonishingly powerful tool, and writers know how to use it. And if it's there for a reason. We've chosen not to have anyone speak at that particular moment for a reason. So therefore, why suddenly you come crashing in with, you know, extraneous improvised dialogue or whatever happens? You're like, no, it's a moment of silence. So I agree completely with you. I think silence is an incredibly powerful tool.
I remember when I first started working, you quite often get scripts to look at, and I was astonished by the amount of detail that were in some of them. I mean, you know, down to minute little details about stuff. And there was quite often little bits that would say, and the music would stop, or, you know, something would come in here, or, you know, I don't want this, I don't want that. And it was really an eye opener to see the script and to see how much of what would end up at the end, the final product, was actually in the script. So much of it.
I think that's an interesting point you're raising, because that talks to individual unique screenwriters' voices and their style, which is very important, obviously, for composers as well, because each individual composer composes in their unique way. There is a tradition in some, in American screenplays, I think. I think it's really fascinating if you read a lot of screenplays. In the American tradition, they're honed down and they're very economic, and they're, the guy walks up to the doors of the tall building, they open. It would be like that sparse or whatever. Whereas other writers, it's much more detailed, much more prosaic, much more novelistic. And it just depends on your voice. I am a writer that is in the room. I see the room. I see everything. I see the colors. I see the whatever. I see everything. Now, for some people, that's way too detailed. And quite a lot of times they'll just skip. They'll only read the dialogue when they're reading your screenplay. And you're like, no, I wrote this beautiful passage. But that doesn't make any difference, because that might not necessarily end up on screen. And it's always wonderful for me when I go out to a set or I talk to a director, and you realize that they have taken what you've written and they have put their own genius onto it. And there it is on the screen. And it's fabulous. I mean, recently on Elizabeth, the author Emma Healy went out to set. I wasn't there that day, but I do know that apparently she stood, and I'm speaking not for her, because I wasn't there. So this was reportage, if you like. She stood and looked at it, and she just said, I can't believe I was writing that book on my own all those years ago, and here I am in Maud's world. And I think for an author, that's astonishing when you see that the contents of your brain have been translated into something physical and concrete, because people have paid it that much respect and that much consideration. But not all screenplay writers give you that amount of detail. Interestingly enough, in Seven, apparently, if you read the screenplay, an awful lot of the stuff that was on that screen is in that screenplay. You might not necessarily know that,
Well, from a musical perspective, and I'm sure Dan would be exactly the same here, when I've done TV shows, the script is really the first point of entry for me. Although you are reacting to what's on screen and it is music for picture, having that access to that first voice, how it was intended. And quite often, like you say, that, the silences are in the script, even some music notes. They might have been thinking of a particular style or something. Jazz music is playing, or, and that's really the first point of entry for a composer, I think, is to sit down with a cup of tea and read the script. I
think that's good to hear that. I mean, I think it's important. But I also do think that film is an evolving, organic being, and that it will evolve. And sometimes decisions that are made during the shoot, or, even in consultation with the writer, whatever, by the director, by the DOP, by the cinematographer, by the composer, are better decisions. And it's really important that as a writer, I feel this really strongly, that you are open to that you cannot be defensive. You cannot go, this is my baby and I will not let it be changed, because that way madness lies. Seriously. Because you have got to be open to the fact that this is like, it's going to evolve and it's going to change and it's going to become something that you all own. And therefore, not all of the things that you have put there are going to necessarily be the way that it should be in the end, because better ideas are possible. I know it's hard, but they really are.
But it really speaks to what you were saying about it being a collaborative process and it's owned by everybody. It really is that open mind, isn't it? Leave your ego at the door and let's make the best thing possible.
You absolutely have to. And I think one of the things you learn when you've been around as long as I have and in development on so many different projects with so many different people, you have to be prepared to listen. Otherwise, the good stuff will go flying by, because you'll be so holding on to your own outrage and your own indignation. And that is no good for anybody. I listen all the time. I don't always agree, but I always, always, always listen.
So, Andrea, what advice would you give to your younger self, or anyone out there wanting to become a screenwriter?
I would have said that I needed more confidence in my own, to have more confidence in your own opinion, I think would have been a very important lesson for me, because I tended to be quite bendy to begin with. If somebody, I'm saying a minute ago, you have to listen. I think I listened too much to begin with. I think there is a happy medium where actually you have to be prepared to let some battles go in order to win the war, if you like. Make sure you know your priorities, that what are the things that really, really, really matter. I tend to write to split things into 3 things. And I think I would have told my younger self to do this sooner. Things that I would lie down in the road and die for, that you could run me over with a car and I will not give in. Things that I will shout a lot about and argue my case, but be prepared to shift slightly, and things that actually don't matter that much. And yes, if that, then go. But there are certain things in the stuff that you are writing that you should lie down in the road to protect. And those are the things you need to know. And it wouldn't be all of them, but there would be certain things, so I think it's a little bit too acquiescent to begin with. And now I'm not afraid of my own voice. And I don't mean that just in my writing, I mean my own voice. I'm not afraid to sit in a room and say no. I'm not afraid to turn down projects that I don't feel I can give my heart to. I'm much better at knowing what is right for me and what is not. And even if something is going to be has a big profile, if I don't think I can write it, what is the point of me doing it? Because I will fail. So those things I would have not. I hate to say I once took a book adaptation in my earlier years because I really liked the cover. I wasn't sure about the book, but I really loved the cover, and I thought the cover spoke to me in a way that would help me get over some of the problems, because I thought the cover held the key to the book. Wasn't the case, and so I've made some bad, some not bad decisions, but I've made some wrong decisions, and it's about trusting yourself and having more confidence in that, and being able to go, I don't think so. And so I'm now much better in meetings. I will say no, much more. I think it's a thing that women do. Women get talked over. They get down more than men. I'm afraid to say it. And as I get older, I don't much care whether I'm shouted over or not, because I just keep talking.
Well, I've got 2 girls, 8 and 10, and nobody can talk over the 8-year-old. Absolutely nobody.
Good. I like to hear that. It's things that we're starting to speak up more and to be heard more. And it is not men get, in my industry, if men are difficult, inverted commas, obstreperous, or basically bully, then that's considered to be okay because they're men. If women do it, we're difficult. We are difficult. We should be avoided at all costs because it's not acceptable, and we're not excused. We don't have the same excuses made for us as some of these genius men who romp about, throwing their weight around constantly. But that's why I don't feel the need to be approved of in a way that I was before.
Well, we've enjoyed listening to you today, Andrea.
Very much so.
You'll have to do a bit of editing.
No, it's been really illuminating, and I think actually, Dan, it's going to help us quite a lot, isn't it?
The stuff about the plot points that I've written down here, I think is gold dust. Yeah, and I do think it will definitely help inform us to make some better choices, I think.
Rich Cartoons writes on Apple Podcasts, great idea for a mysterious craft. Many thanks to Gareth and Dan for the start of what will be a most enlightening and entertaining series on the mysterious art of score composing. As listening to scores is my passion, I'll be fascinated to discover how it all comes together. Looking forward to hearing further developments. Thank you ever so much, Rich Cartoons, for your review.
Oh, yes, thank you, Rich. That's very nice of you. I hope you'll agree that we've had some fantastic guests thus far, plus we've got some amazing ones lined up. But if you happen to know of anyone who you think would be a good fit us to be a guest on the podcast, then please do get in touch.
Or indeed, if you are someone in the production industry who would like to offer your amazing wisdom
Yes.
and experience.
Then do get in touch. And you can do that via the makingasoundtrack.com website.
Is that a wrap?
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
How do you find us online? Makingasoundtrack.com will tell you all you need to know, links to the podcast, social media links, there's information about us and anything that might be useful.
If you've been enjoying the show and you like what you hear, we'd really be grateful if you could give us a good rating on your podcast app. And if you enjoyed this episode, tell someone, share our posts, give us feedback. We're relying on your generosity to spread the word.
Thanks for joining us and hope you can join us next time.
Thanks for listening. Bye. Right, I'm going to have to do this because I'm reading it off something and I'm looking slightly bizarrely at the microphone and now I'm dead. Oh, it's